let's talk in military terms. Militarily speaking, is this the beginning of the end? Because they're talking about a pause in fighting, not a permanent ceasefire.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? After 15 months of fighting, tens of thousands of people, Palestinians largely killed, millions of people displaced, there's an area of hope that somehow we've got to the end of this. The challenge with ceasefires, though, is generally speaking, they only either occur when both sides have fought each other to a standstill and are in a stalemate, or one side has won and the other side has lost. Neither of those two situations prevail as we sit and look at it today. So why have they agreed? Almost certainly political pressure. I think what is interesting, phase one of this deal, which does appear likely to get through, is because the hostages are a key part of that deal. It suits both parties. From an Israeli perspective, Prime Minister Netanyahu's been under a lot of pressure to get some of the hostages out, so it'll suit him. And for Hamas, they currently hold about 94, we believe, hostages. Potentially two-thirds of those are alive. And, of course, when they had the whole of Gaza to hide them, a relatively simple job. Now that they've actually been embattled, they're actually in much smaller locations scattered around. That will make logistically their challenge. And they probably only need one hostage, maybe half a dozen. So getting rid of some of the hostages, handing them back, buys them time. Therefore, that might help. But when we look at phase two and phase three, there's a lot more pressure to come, and we're a long way away from agreeing a long-term deal.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of hope amidst a lot of caution, isn't there? And you mentioned, the death and destruction that we've seen and, of course, the concern for the hostages' safety. Amidst all of this, we've just heard from the Prime Minister's cabinet that it's all about the war's objectives being achieved. Have either side achieved any of their objectives? What were they?
Yeah, it's fascinating because before a military operation starts, you generally try and work out what's the end state and what are your objectives along the way. And although we clearly can't get inside Hamas's head, it is quite... They initiated this on the 7th of October, 15 months ago. There are four objectives, we believe. One of them was to stop the expansion of the Israeli settlements, not just in the West Bank, but also in Jerusalem. The second one was to establish a Palestinian state. That's something that they've been saying for years. They also want to free all of the Palestinian political prisoners, and actually all the prisoners if they can. And the final one is to lift the siege of Gaza, which hasn't just been going on since the 7th of October. Now, if you look at those objectives, they are likely to get some of the Palestinian prisoners released, but largely they have not succeeded with the rest of these. If you then look at it through the Israeli lens, obviously they would only set their objectives on the 7th of October and beyond. Very publicly, they said their initial aim was to destroy Hamas. They modified that later to say degrade their ability to actually conduct military action and also to govern. Clearly, they wanted to return the hostages to Israel. And the third objective was in the north of the country, Israelis had to leave. So they wanted to secure the environment for Israelis to return to their homes. And that meant dealing with Hezbollah. If you look at those, largely they have been completed, apart from the hostages. And that's why we're getting so much effort around this phase one of the deal to try and get some of those hostages released.
Yeah, and another crucial factor, of course, is the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, particularly from the most populated part of the area. Is this the first step towards a total withdrawal, do we think?
Well, we've got to be careful what we know and what we don't know at the moment. So what we know at the moment is they've said that part of phase one is a partial withdrawal, and the Israelis have said they'll withdraw out of the main population centres. If we look at that, that's largely Gaza City and Khan Yunis down to the south. The trouble is, from a military perspective, it's really hard to take ground. It's relatively easy to withdraw. At the moment, the Israeli Defence Forces have their foot on the throat of Hamas. If they withdraw, they give Hamas the opportunity to regenerate, to rebuild their power base, and also to restock and rearm along the way. Now, that's something that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been really clear. He does not want to abandon Gaza and it to return. There's a couple of areas which I think will be very reluctant to give up, one of which is the corridor up to the north here, which splits northern and southern Gaza as an element of control. But the key one is the Philadelphia corridor down with you. That border with Egypt is where most of the weapons have come across over the years into Hamas's hands. It's quite difficult to get them in anywhere else. I don't think that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to give that up anytime soon.